The morning of the Ashworth Midsummer Assembly arrived on a current of heat and gardenia, and Miss Cecily Pratt arrived with it, brought by the cart of the Ashworth housekeeper, who had purchased her as one purchases a useful domestic object, without ceremony, without expectation of complaint, and without the slightest concern for what she had been before. What she had been before was the question that still lived in the hinge of her jaw. The way she held her chin when she entered a room, she was not meant to enter. She wore gray tonight. Practical gray, the kind that swallows a woman whole and returns nothing. The gown was too large across the shoulder and had been taken in with small stitches that showed if the candlelight caught them correctly, which it did now, in the upper gallery where she had been sent to count the silver. She counted it. She did not look down into the ballroom below. She did not permit herself that she looked. Anyway, was not her fault. The mirror at the gallery's far end gave her the whole of it, the assembly in full motion below, 36 candles in a string quartet, and the Countess of Ashworth in diamonds at the room's center, her white silk gown wide enough to establish a small principality. And at the far wall alone, his coat, the dark blue of November water, stood Lord Ravenscroft. She had not known he would be here. She had not known he was the sort of man who occupied the far wall of a room while every other man in the room circulated. His face was turned slightly from the crowd. His jaw had the still quality of weathered stone. He was watching the door, not the dancers. And then, though no one had moved to suggest she was worth watching, he looked up. His gaze found her in the gallery, with the precision of a man who had already known she was there. She turned back to the silver and finished her count. The forks were cold in her hands, the silver old enough to bear the faint marks of many previous counters, the small dents and scratches that accumulated over decades of midsummer assemblies, and she aligned each one with the careful attention she gave to things that could be completed and set aside. What she could not know, setting each fork back into its velvet slot with hands that did not quite belong to her in that moment, was that his expression had not changed. It had not changed, and that was the thing about Lord Ravenscroft that no one in the room below had yet learned to read correctly. She had come to Ashworth Park 6 weeks earlier, under the title of upper parlor maid, a designation applied by the Countess with audible satisfaction, the sort of satisfaction one takes in the correction of a mistake that should never have occurred. Cecily had been, until 6 months prior, employed as companion to the elderly Lady Marchmont of Herefordshire. She had not been dismissed from that post. Lady Marchmont had died, gently, in November, and the household had dissolved around her like sugar, in warm water. The agency in London had offered Ashworth. The county was Derbyshire. The house was large enough that a woman with no references beyond a dead woman's drawing room could be absorbed into its lower ranks without anyone's particular attention. That was the condition she had named for herself upon accepting. No one's particular attention. To the Countess of Ashworth, whose 3 daughters required the full machinery of a London season, and whose mind ran perpetually on the calculus of rank, Cecily was simply the reading maid, which was the Countess's term for a woman who had come to the position carrying more books than clothes, and who had been found, twice, attending to the library rather than the linen. The Countess used the phrase without cruelty, and without particular interest. It was a category. Categories were the Countess's primary instrument of thought. The library at Ashworth Park was the most generously stocked room Cecily had encountered in her 23 years, and she had encountered several libraries, because the man who had raised her, Reverend Pratt of the village of Brockford, had maintained the habit of filling whatever house he occupied with books he could not afford. She had read the entirety of his modest collection by the age of 15. Lady Marchmont's library had doubled what she knew. Ashworth's library was a third country entirely. She had not intended to be found in it at 5:30 in the morning, her candle low, Gibbon open across her knees, when Lord Ravenscroft arrived to retrieve a document his solicitor required by post. The library at that hour smelled of cold wax and old paper and the faint wood smoke of the previous evening's fire, and she had been there long enough that the cold from the stone floor had settled into the soles of her feet without her quite noticing. She had heard the door. She had not moved quickly enough. He stopped in the doorway. The candle made him very tall. "The post goes at 7, he said, his voice low. unhurried, as though he had found nothing in the least unusual. "Wanton, I am aware," she said. She closed the book. She rose. She did not apologize for the book or the hour, because she had learned that apologies for reading were the first step toward being told not to read, and she had no intention of being told that. He looked at her for a moment longer than the situation required. His eyes were dark gray in the candlelight, and they moved briefly to the spine of the volume in her hands. Then he stepped aside from the doorway to let her pass. She passed him. The hem of her gown cleared his boot by 2 inches. She felt the warmth of him across that 2 inches like a change in weather. She did not look back. He did not say anything further. It would have been simpler if he had. What followed was the Countess's assembly, and the silver, and the gallery, and the look that had found her, before she was ready to be found. The assembly continued below. A set formed. The string quartet managed a passable handle. Cecily finished her count, wrapped her shawl closer, and sat in the small chair the housekeeper, Mrs. Crane, had placed in the gallery for the purpose of keeping someone with the silver. The chair's seat was hard. The gallery was warm, from the candles rising. She sat very still and watched the room below, between the balustrade's uprights, the way a woman watches a country she has crossed out of. Lord Ravenscroft did not dance. He spoke to 3 men across the course of 2 hours and to no women at all. The Countess attempted, at 9 o'clock, to install herself and her eldest daughter near him, a daughter called Miss Georgiana, who had the pink and gold quality of something expensive in a shop window. He acknowledged the Countess. He said perhaps 4 words to Georgiana. He then looked up at the gallery again, briefly, for no reason that could be named. Miss Pratt looked at the silver. The gallery's one useful window faced east. By its light, in the morning, she had begun to understand that the document she had seen Lord Ravenscroft collect from the library was not, as she had assumed, an estate record. It had been sealed with a different kind of wax and addressed in a hand she recognized, not from correspondence she had seen at Ashworth, but from a packet of letters she had carried all her life in the bottom of her traveling case, letters written to a woman called Clara, letters that had been bundled with a small silk ribbon the color of old roses. The letters had been her mother's. The hand was her mother's solicitor's. She had not thought much about the hand before, because she had not thought much about the letters before, because she had been trained, from very young, to understand that the letters were sealed and must remain so, and that her mother was gone, and that whatever had been was past, and that the present was what required her attention. Reverend Pratt had said all of this to her quietly. The winter. She turned 9, after she had asked once about the packet, and he had answered with such deliberate gentleness that she had understood the subject was closed. The packet remained in her traveling case. She had carried it from Brockford to Bath, to Lady Marchmont's house in Herefordshire, to London, to Ashworth Park. She had not opened it. She told herself she did not open it because she respected the late Reverend Pratt's wishes. This was partly true. The fuller truth was that she was afraid of what the letters might say, and she had learned to be comfortable with not knowing, because not knowing had always been available to her, and knowing had not. If you carry the question long enough without an answer, the question becomes familiar. You grow accustomed to its weight. The morning after the assembly, she went to the library to replace Gibbon. Lord Ravenscroft was not there. The document was not there. A ribbon of sealing wax, red, had fallen against the edge of the writing desk, the kind that comes from a candle used to seal in haste. She picked it up without thinking, turned it in her fingers, set it down. He came in 20 minutes later. He stopped when he saw her, the way he had stopped in the doorway before, and she observed that he did not begin speaking until he had decided to. "The book is the wrong one," he said. She looked at the shelf. She had returned Gibbon to the history section. "I think not," she said. "The history section runs along the south wall," he said. "The volume you are holding belongs on the west shelf." She looked at the volume in her hand. It was a collection of correspondence. She saw now she had taken it without looking, her hand reaching by habit toward the space where the Gibbon had come from, and had lifted the wrong thing. She looked at the spine. The letters of a man called Harcastle, Earl of Fenwick, private correspondence, 1791 to 1815. Something moved in her chest. It was not a thought. It arrived before thinking, the way cold arrives before you understand you are standing in it. "I apologize," she said. Her voice was level. "I shall replace it properly." She crossed the room and set it on the west shelf, precisely where the gap indicated it should live. Her hand left the spine. She stepped back. He had not moved from his position by the door. He was watching her in the way she was beginning to understand. He watched things, not with hunger, not with particular social intent, but with the attention of someone to whom accuracy mattered, and who had not yet determined whether what he was looking at was accurate. "You are not from Brockford," he said. She turned to face him. "I am," she said. "I was raised there." "Raised," he said. "Not born." The words sat between them. She did not answer immediately, which was itself an answer. He took it as one because he did not press further. He crossed to his desk, opened the drawer, and set his hand on a sealed letter that she had not seen before. He said nothing more. She left the room. That afternoon, she opened the packet. The letters were dated between 1802 and 1806. There were 11 of them, written by a solicitor called Graves, whose address was a street in London she did not know. Several concerned an account maintained in a name she did not recognize. Lady Clara Fenwick. The name sat very still in her mind, the way the wax ribbon had sat still in her fingers. She was not stupid. She was the sort of woman who had read enough to know that intelligence is sometimes the precise instrument of your own undoing, because it will follow a line of reasoning to its conclusion, whether you are ready for the conclusion or not. She followed the line. She read every letter. By the time she reached the last one, dated the spring of 1806, she understood that the woman called Lady Clara Fenwick had married the man called Harcastle, Earl of Fenwick, in a quiet ceremony witnessed by a rector and a woman called her cousin, and that Lady Clara had died the following winter in Brockford, in the care of a clergyman who had been provided with an annuity and a strict understanding. Cecily sat for a long time with the letters in her lap. The last letter made reference to a document held by the solicitor's office against the occasion of proof being required. The document was a certificate of birth. Her name was on it. The name Fenwick was on it. She thought of the west shelf in the library. She thought of the gap where the volume of private correspondence had lived. She thought of the hand on the sealed letter in the drawer, and the deliberate quality of it, and the question Lord Ravenscroft had not finished asking. She put the letters back. She tied the ribbon. She sat for another long while in the silence of her room. She thought, as she had learned to do in moments of difficulty, about the problem at its simplest. The Countess of Ashworth employed her. The Countess's husband, the Earl of Ashworth, was the man most likely to be aware of any connection between the Harcastle estate and whatever arrangement had been made in Brockford 18 years ago, because the Ashworth and Harcastle families had been neighbors, and neighbors in Derbyshire knew everything. If the Earl knew, the Countess knew. If the Countess knew, the position of upper parlour maid made a particular kind of sense, the kind of sense that keeps a person contained and accessible and thoroughly positioned to be controlled. She had been called the reading maid, and laughed at, gently, by the Countess's 2 younger daughters. She had been placed in the gallery with the silver while the assembly took place below. She had been kept in view. The knowledge that she had been kept in view made her calm, in the way that cold water on a burn produces a kind of clarity. The sting was there. The clarity was also there. She understood what must be done before the Countess understood that she understood. She had 3 materials: the letters, the certificate, wherever it was held, and the private correspondence on the west shelf. She could not use any of them alone. What she needed was a man whose rank outweighed the Earl of Ashworth's calculation, and whose honesty she had enough evidence to trust. She had watched Lord Ravenscroft for 6 weeks. She had listened to the way he spoke to Mrs. Crane, who was a woman of 50 with no social standing whatsoever. and noted that he spoke to her, as he spoke to everyone, directly, without the adjustment for rank that most men applied, without thinking. She had watched him decline to correct the Countess in a public moment, when she had attributed to him a political opinion he did not hold, and she had watched, instead, the brief, expressionless quality his face took, on the quality of a man who has learned that some errors are not worth the cost of correction, and some errors are— She had heard the Earl of Ashworth 2 evenings prior address Lord Ravenscroft in a tone that presumed confidentiality. She had been passing the study with a tray. She had not stopped. She had heard, without intending to, 3 sentences that she did not fully understand at the time, about a settlement and an arrangement concluded before Lord Ravenscroft had arrived in the county, and about the necessity of things remaining as they were until the proper season. Lord Ravenscroft had said, in response, something very short and very level. That she had not caught the whole of his tone had been the tone of a man indicating that the conversation was concluded. She did not know what that meant. She knew that the Earl of Ashworth feared whatever Lord Ravenscroft's response had been. She had felt that fear in the way the Earl's voice had changed after it, the upward pitch of a man who has discovered that his preparation was insufficient. She prepared herself. She had one opportunity, and the opportunity was the library. She waited until the morning was well established, the household at its work, and she went to the library with the letters, and without the pretense of a book. She set them on the desk. She sat in the hard chair across from it. She folded her hands. She waited. He arrived at 9. He stopped in the doorway and looked at the letters on his desk, and then at her. And she saw something shift in his face, very small. The way ice shifts over a river before you understand that the thaw has begun. The correspondence on the west shelf, she said. I had occasion to examine it more carefully. He did not speak. There is a certificate, she said, held by a solicitor named Graves in London. I do not have it. I have the letters. She touched the packet. I have not opened these to you as a petition. I have no particular desire for anything to change. I have a position. It is not comfortable, but I am adequate to it. I open them because you asked a question and I did not answer it, and I have found that unanswered questions have a way of being answered by the wrong person if one waits too long. He was still. His hands were at his sides. He was looking at her with the gray eyes that were lighter now, in the morning, closer to the color of still water. You know, she said, what the Earl has arranged. Yes, he said. One word. The words, level. And you did not consider informing me. I considered it, he said. I was uncertain whether you were aware. I was not. He walked to the desk slowly and stood with the letters between them. He did not touch them. He looked at her, and she found when he looked at her that directly, that she could not quite order her breathing into its usual configuration. She ordered it anyway. Lady Clara Fenwick's daughter has been kept in this house as a parlour-maid, she said, with the knowledge and compliance of the Earl of Ashworth, who was the late Lord Fenwick's closest associate and the executor of whatever arrangement was made in Brockford. You came to this county because the Fenwick estate, in the absence of a legitimate heir, was scheduled to pass to a cousin. You were appointed by Chancery to review the settlement. Yes, he said again. And the Earl told you there was no heir. The quality of his face in that moment was the quality she had heard called cold by everyone in the household, and that she had understood, from the first morning in the library, was not cold at all. It was the quality of a man controlling a very precise anger. He did, Lord Ravenscroft said. She had not expected her own composure to cost her so much. She had prepared for this conversation for 2 days, rehearsed its logic, anticipated its turns. She had not anticipated the way the room would feel with him, standing across a narrow desk from her, the morning light between them, the letters on the wood between their hands. I will require the certificate from Graves, she said. I cannot compel him to produce it without a legal mechanism. I do not know how to engage. I can engage it, he said. She looked at him. she said. "I know." He looked at her for a long time. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way that was inconvenient, and that she set aside with the practice of someone who had long experience of setting aside inconvenient things. "Why did you come to me with this?" he said, not as an accusation, as a genuine question. "Because you asked," she said, "whether I was raised in Brockford or born there. And because a man who asks that question already knows the answer, and is offering the person across from him the choice of whether to confirm it, that is not the action of a man who intends to compound an injustice." He was quiet for a moment that stretched past its natural length. Then he said, "Sit down." She sat. She noted that she had been standing without being aware of it. He wrote 3 letters at his desk while she sat in the hard chair and watched the fire, which was low but present, the coals from the night before still giving off a thin orange light. He sealed each letter with his own seal and addressed them in a hand that was swift and precise and that she did not read. When he had finished the 3rd, he set his pen down. "The coach leaves for London at noon," he said. "Graves will have the 1st letter by Friday. And the Earl," she said. "The Earl will receive the 2nd this afternoon by hand, and the 3rd—" He looked at the 3rd letter for a moment. "The 3rd is mine," he said. "It is none of your concern." She accepted this. She rose. She took the packet of letters, which he had not touched. "Miss Pratt," he said. She stopped. He was looking at her with an expression that was not quite the stone-and-smoke expression she had categorized in the gallery, and not quite anything she had a name for. And she was someone who named things carefully. "Cecily," he said. One word. Her given name. He used it without performance, without the deliberate weight of a declaration. He used it the way one uses a name that one has been thinking, privately, for some time. She said nothing. Her hand was at the doorframe. "Come back this afternoon," he said. "We will require a solicitor of your own." She came back this afternoon. The Earl received Lord Ravenscroft's letter at 3 o'clock in the study, and his face when he emerged into the corridor was the face of a man who has found that the bridge he has been standing on for 19 years has been inspected by someone who knows engineering. The Countess was summoned. Their voices were audible, though not the words, through the study door for approximately 20 minutes. Then the study was quiet. The Countess emerged at 4. She walked the length of the corridor and stopped when she reached the parlor, where Cecily was polishing candlesticks, which she did now with a particular attention to each individual taper cup, because it was better than standing and waiting for whatever was coming to arrive. The Countess said, "It appears we have been proceeding under a misapprehension." Cecily set down the candlestick. She said, "It appears so. You might have said something," the Countess said. Her voice had the careful flatness of a woman, rearranging a very large mental construction. "I was unaware myself," Cecily said. Until 4 days ago, the Countess was quiet. The Countess had 3 daughters and a great deal of experience with situations that required rapid recalibration. She applied that experience now the way she always did, with the expressionless efficiency of someone who had learned that any response arriving too quickly was a response not yet considered. Her fan was held at its usual measured height. Her posture did not change. Only the slight tightening around her eyes suggested that what she was recalibrating was not small. "Lord Ravenscroft has written to my husband," she said. "He has indicated that the matter will be settled through Chancery within the quarter." "Yes?" Cecily said. The Countess looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not entirely without some private acknowledgment of error. "You are very composed," she said. Cecily said nothing. She picked up the 2nd candlestick. The Countess left. The certificate arrived from London on the Friday, as Lord Ravenscroft had said it would. Graves himself arrived with it, a small man of 60, with the careful manner of someone who has waited a long time to deliver something he was not proud of having withheld. He sat with Cecily in the morning room, which the Countess had offered without comment, and he laid the document on the table between them and said that he had kept it against the occasion of exactly this. that the late Lord Fenwick had arranged all of it with the intention that it never be needed, and that he was very sorry, in the end, that it had been. She looked at it. The names were as she had expected. Her mother's name, her own. The date of her birth in Brockford, the witness's name, the seal of the church where the Reverend Pratt had officiated, and subsequently kept the secret for 19 years, in exchange for a modest living and a genuine tenderness for the child who would never understand why he answered certain questions with such deliberate gentleness. She did not cry. She had no particular desire to cry. She felt instead the specific weight of a thing that has been carried so long it has become part of the body's configuration, and the strange lightness of beginning to understand that the carrying was almost over. Lord Ravenscroft came to the morning room at 11. He looked at the certificate, and then at Graves, and then at her, and Graves stood and made himself scarce in the efficient manner of a man who has served a long penance and knows when he has been released from it. She and Lord Ravenscroft sat across the table in the morning room, with the certificate between them and the document the Chancery required of her, which was a formal statement to be made before a magistrate. And the window behind him was very bright. "You do not have to do this immediately," he said. "I know," she said. "I prefer to." He looked at her. She had learned over the preceding days that his looking had at least 3 distinct registers. The first was professional, the attention of a man with a legal question to resolve. The second was something quieter, the attention of a man who was listening more carefully than the conversation required, and the third was the one she did not have a name for, which was the one he was employing now. "I had been told," he said carefully, "by the Earl when I first arrived in the county that there was no heir and no question of one. He was very certain. He had been certain for 19 years, she said. Certainty is easier when the thing you are certain of is kept in your own house as a parlor maid. He said nothing for a moment. "When this is settled," he said, "the Fenwick estate will require an heir. The entail runs in the male line." "Yes," she said. "You will, however, take your mother's portion. The unentailed properties are considerable." She had not thought about this. She had thought about the certificate and the letters, and what they meant for who she was, and she had not yet thought about what they meant for what she owned. The distance between those two questions felt at present like the distance between the bottom of the stairs and the top of a very high house. "That is a matter for later," she said. "Yes," he said. "There is one matter, however, that I should raise now." She waited. He was looking at the certificate and not at her, and she had learned that he did this when he was about to say something he had prepared. The preparation was visible in his posture, the careful alignment of his shoulders. "I came to Derbyshire on Chancery business," he said. "That business will conclude within the quarter. After that, there is no particular reason for me to remain in the county." He was quiet for a moment. "I have found, however, that I have a reason to consider remaining." She did not speak. He looked up. "I am not offering you a business arrangement," he said. "I want to be precise about that. I am aware that you have just spent 6 weeks as a parlor maid in a house that was managed to keep you unaware of your own position. I am aware that the last thing you have any desire for is another situation in which someone else makes decisions about your life and presents them to you as facts. I am not proposing a situation." He stopped. "Pie." He looked at the certificate again. His hands were flat on the table. "I am telling you," he said, "that I would like very much to know what you decide, once you have had the time to decide it. That is all." She looked at him for a long moment. His jaw was very still. His hands were very still. He was watching her with the third register, the one she did not have a name for, and she understood suddenly that the reason she did not have a name for it was that she had never before seen a man look at a woman the way he was looking at her, with an attention that was not about what she could provide or what position she occupied, but about what she actually was. Her hands were in her lap. She was aware of them the way you are aware of something that wants to move and is not moving. "I have been thinking," she said, "since Tuesday." Yes, he said. I have not been thinking about the estate, she said. Or about the certificate. Or about what the county will say. He waited. I have been thinking, she said, about the morning in the library, when you let me pass. His face did not change in any dramatic way. It changed the way stone changes when the light moves across it, the surface still, but the quality of the whole thing becoming something different. I noticed, she said, that you stepped aside before I asked you to. She got up from the table. She walked around it. She stopped when she was close enough that the morning light fell across both of them, and she could see without difficulty the gray of his eyes, which were not cold at all. I should like to know you better, she said, before I decide anything. He rose. He was a great deal taller than the table had suggested. He was very still, the way he was always still, except that his hands were not flat now. They were at his sides with the particular quality of someone who has decided not to reach for something because he has been told to wait. I can accommodate that, he said, the words level. She smiled. It was not a practiced smile. It surprised her slightly. He noticed. He did not quite smile in return, but the corner of his mouth moved in a way that was, she thought, his version of one. The Chancery matter was settled by the end of September. Graves returned to London with the documentation. The Earl of Ashworth composed a letter of explanation to 3 of his most important associates. A letter that was by all accounts extremely carefully worded. The Countess called on Cecily in the morning room and brought Georgiana, and Miss Harriet, who was the youngest and had been the kindest during the 6 weeks of parlor service, and said something about the neighborhood's capacity for adjustment, by which she meant her own. The Fenwick estate was Cecily's mother's portion, a house of modest consequence in the next county, with a home farm and 14 acres of productive ground, and a library that she did not yet know contained 3 Gibbon volumes and a set of correspondence that would keep her occupied for the better part of a winter. She did not go there immediately. She had agreed at Lord Ravenscroft's invitation to remain in the county through October. Nominally, as the guest of a distant relation of the Countess, who was connected to the Fenwick family by marriage, and who was very pleased to be connected to anything of consequence. The arrangement was perfectly proper. It was the sort of arrangement the season's machinery was built to accommodate, and she found, for the first time, that she did not object to the machinery. He came to call 3 times in October, and on the 3rd occasion they walked the grounds of the Ashworth Gardens because the day was mild, and because they had both had enough of interiors. The gardens had turned with the month, the herbaceous borders stripped back to bare stalks, the stone paths filmed with a thin, dry scatter of leaves from the avenue of beeches, the sky above the garden wall, the particular pale gray of a Derbyshire autumn afternoon that is not quite threatening rain. He walked at her pace without commenting on it. He did not offer his arm until they had reached the rose arbor at the garden's far end, and when he did, he said nothing. He simply extended it, and she took it with the same ease. There is something I should like to say, he said, when they had gone a little further. You have the habit of preparing, she said. Yes, he said. I have noticed. He was quiet for a moment. The light was the amber light of an October afternoon, the kind that makes everything slightly more itself than usual. I was engaged, he said, 4 years ago, to a woman who died before the marriage could take place. She had been ill for some time, before I understood the extent of it. I did not understand the extent of it because she did not tell me, and she did not tell me because she believed I would end the engagement if I knew, which I would not have done. He stopped walking. They were at the rose arbor, the last roses gone by now, the canes bare and angular, against the gray stone of the garden wall. I have thought a great deal, he said, about the cost of things people do not say. I find I prefer now to say things when they want to be said, even when it is uncomfortable. She looked at him. His jaw was the still, carved quality it always was, and his eyes were very clear. I am in love with you, he said. I have been since the library, or perhaps since the gallery, which came first. I am not asking you to receive that as an obligation. I am simply declining to not say it." She stood for a moment in the amber light with the bare rose canes behind her, and the warmth of his arm under her hand, and the weight of the packet of letters, which she no longer carried because Graves had taken them for the legal record, but whose absence she still felt sometimes. The way you feel the shape of a thing you have set down after carrying it for years. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "I have known," she said, "since you stepped aside in the doorway." He reached very slowly, with the care of someone who has waited long enough that care is the only sensible approach, and touched her jaw with 2 fingers, tilting her face slightly toward him. She let him. The pressure of his fingers was light and precise and warm. He kissed her, briefly, softly, the way a question is asked when the questioner is already fairly certain of the answer but considers certainty no reason to skip the asking. She stood for a moment, after he had drawn back. The garden was very quiet. A late thrush was working in the distance. "I should like," she said, "to see the library at the Fenwick House." "I will take you," he said. They walked back through the garden at the same pace as before. The amber light was already thinning toward the blue of early evening, and the house windows had begun to glow. By the following spring she had seen the library. It required, she told him, more Gibbon. He sent to London for it. The morning the volumes arrived, she was standing in the Fenwick Library with the letter of Providence still in her hand, and he was in the doorway, and the light was the clear light of an April morning that makes everything feel recently arrived at, which was accurate, which was the precise word for it. The way a woman stands in a room that was always hers, and feels it become hers. At last, he stepped inside. He did not stop in the doorway this time. She set the letter down on the desk beside the small silk ribbon, the color of old roses, the ribbon that had once bound a packet of letters she had carried for 19 years, and that she had kept because it was the only thing that had belonged without complication to her mother. She did not look at it now. She looked at him. He reached across the desk and took her hand, in the plain morning light, without ceremony. His grip was warm and direct, the grip of a man who has finished waiting. Outside, the home farm was already at its April work, and the sound of it came through the library's open window, and the window looked east, over the 14 acres her mother had loved and never returned to, and the light lay across the floor in long stripes, and the room smelled of leather and cold stone and the faint green scent of new leaves. She knew what she had. She had always known how to count things carefully. She had counted better this time. If this story sat with you, you are not alone in it. This hour was worth every moment you gave it. Stay a little longer, stay as often as you like, and know that the next story is already waiting, because they always are. The ribbon was warm in the morning light. She left it where it was.